I've traveled all across the country interviewing my friends to get their thoughts about money in this time. But today I'm excited to welcome Dr. Jordan Grumet, the creator of the Earn and Invest podcast and the author of Taking Stock, to my living room. Jordan is a hospice doctor who has unique thoughts about end-of-life care and the relationship between money and time. We've had so many conversations, but this is the first one that we're capturing on film. I can't wait for you to hear it. Hey Jordan, thanks for taking the time to come to my house here in Ohio and sit down and chat with me. Over the years, we've had some incredible conversations, but very few of them have been recorded, so I'm really excited to let the audience in on one of these chats. There's so much that I want to cover with you today, but really the first question is, who is Jordan Grumet? Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and your history and how you got into medicine?
So I grew up in Evanston, Illinois, the son of a house mom and a doctor. And at 8 years old, my father died. And at that point in life, I wanted to be just like him. So I had this vision of who I wanted to be, and it was my dad. And so it started this process of becoming a doctor. Like, it was the only thing I ever considered doing. In fact, I had a learning disability when I was a kid, so it was questionable whether I'd ever really learn how to read. But in my mind, that was a given because I was going to follow in my dad's footsteps. Looking back, it gave me a sense of purpose and meaning about what happened to me, because when you're 8, you can't really put it together. Like, why does a parent die? But it gave me this great sense of purpose, and I followed that passion all the way through college and medical school. And I lived life as a practicing physician until at some point I realized that it wasn't really making me happy.
Why do you think so many doctors and lawyers and business people who go to school to learn their craft and get into their job, why do you think so many of them that don't like it just continue to stay and are so afraid to quit?
Oh, I mean, it's incredibly hard. And so when I finally realized that I financially was well off enough to leave medicine, you think it would have been a no-brainer, right? I was exhausted, I was burned out. Not at all. Like lawyers, like other people who take on these big professions in which you identify yourself by, you've lived your whole life in the ascertainment of this goal. And for me, it wasn't only that, it was also a connection to my father. Like, this was that last wisp of connection to a guy who died when I was 8 years old. Letting go of medicine was letting go of my identity and letting go of this relationship that was from a very early age that disappeared, right? So it was really, really hard for me, and I think it's really hard for other professionals when you've built your life around this. This is the thing people knew me for. He's Jordan the doctor, right? That's how people identified me. It wasn't just my own internal identification.
So can you talk a little bit about how you felt making that shift? So I know now you work part-time as a hospice doctor, so you're still a doctor, but you had this moment of where there was sort of a downshift and some change. Can you talk about what that process was like?
So I discovered financial independence because I was writing a medical blog at the time, and this guy, Jim Dolly, the white coat investor, sent me his book and asked me to review his book for my medical blog. But it was a financial book. And I'd always been good at finances. I came from a family that was very financially savvy, so I had lots of great financial modeling, but I knew none of the reasons behind it, and I certainly didn't know how to calculate what enough money looks like. And so I got his book and read it, and all of a sudden it was an epiphany. It was like, oh my God, I understand how to calculate enough. I understand what to do with my finances, and I quickly did it and realized I'm financially independent. I have enough money that if I really chose to walk away from medicine, I could at that moment. You would think I'd be jubilant because I was exhausted by medicine. I was ready to move on. In fact, that was what I was working towards. I was doing all sorts of side hustles and things to make extra money to make sure I was safe. But actually, I got depressed and really anxious because for the first time in my life, I had to really question who I am, because I had to drop that identity as a physician and say, okay, if you are no longer going to participate in this thing that you spent 20 years of your life getting to, who are you? So I didn't leave my job right away. I had to go through the process of mourning the loss of the identity I thought was mine. And then I had to figure out, well, what are my purpose and identity? By then I was a husband and a dad, and those things are great, and those are part of my purpose, but for most of us, that can't be everything. Like, we need some part of purpose that's all our own, that's about who we were meant to be. And so I had to start addressing this idea of, well, who am I? what is my place in this world? And that took time.
So as you were a doctor and starting to think about maybe scaling down your medical practice or making this transition after discovering financial independence, how much did all the money that you were making influence your hesitancy or decision?
You know, it definitely did, because I grew up feeling like I was the moneymaker. Part of it was that connection to my father. Part of it was being a healer. And part of it was being a money earner. And walking away from medicine would mean walking away from all of that. And so even though my finances were in order, I started to realize that these things weren't making me happy. Oh man, is that the van?
It's the van, man.
The last time I saw that is when Cody drove it down through Chicago on the tour.
Yeah, book tour. I drove this 13,800 miles, man. Look at this.
Still in good shape.
Still in okay shape. Check this out.
Who is sleeping here?
This was my bunk. The top bunk was Cody's, but look, I've got my little Warren Buffett ducky.
My other vehicle's a 401k.
Got some money stickers. Yeah, these are all the places we went.
Did you guys cook in here?
Cooked in here, yeah. It's got the 2-burner stove. It's got the fridge. We also had a cooler. It's like traveling with your living room, so you can really take your home, you know, everywhere. So let's talk about the transition to being a hospice doctor. Were you always a hospice doctor? Did you work in a hospital? When did you start working and supporting people who were in the process of dying?
After my dad died, I always had a sensitivity to end-of-life issues, right? When I was in college, for instance, I remember one of my friend's grandfather died, and I was the one who stayed up half the night with her dealing with those issues, even though I had a big test the next day, which I eventually got a low grade on. But that was me. So when I entered medical school, the first thing I did in the first week of medical school is I volunteered for the hospice program. My first patient encounters were with hospice patients. So this is my body telling me what I needed. Of course, I didn't listen. Like, I never considered doing hospice medicine as my primary focus, which probably would have allayed a lot of that burnout that I eventually felt. But instead, I went into internal medicine, but always ended up practicing hospice medicine. Internal medicine doctors take care of everyone, including the elderly. And so people always sent me their elderly patients, and I was usually the one who walked in the room and said, you know what? You're not gonna get better from this. How can we make life valuable and livable in this last amount of time you have? I became really good at those conversations, but never did it formally. It was always just part of being the person's family doctor. And at some point, a hospice nurse was watching me as I was having this conversation with my patient. She said, you need to work for us. And so I started consulting with a hospice company. And the beautiful thing about realizing you have enough money is you can take a hard look at what you do every day and start subtracting out those things that don't have meaning to you anymore. And the litmus test for me is always this: what work would you do if no one was paying you for?
Yeah.
And I could answer clearly. If the hospice company said, you know, we don't have enough money, we're not paying you anymore, but we'd really love you to keep taking care of this team of patients, I'd keep doing it.
You know, we often kind of wake up in our life when we confront our mortality, someone in our family dies or we get sick. Why do you think it takes something so large for people to recognize sort of the preciousness of this moment?
Because it's scary. I mean, let's be real. To start thinking about death is to realize that time is finite and there's only a certain chance you're going to be given to do those things that are really important to you. So most people are so afraid of this idea that they put it off, right? It's so much easier to assume that you have forever to live. And when you do that, it gives you a pass not to actually start addressing what's important to you, because that work, the work about identity and purpose that I had to do, was not easy work. It was painful work, much easier to put it off. When you find out you're dying, you realize time is finite and you have no choice.
So are you afraid of death?
I'm not. I guess there are a few reasons. One is, as a hospice doctor, I've seen so many people die, I no longer fear like the physical pain. Like, most people given good hospice care die peacefully and quietly. So I feel much more comfortable about just the actual process. The other thing is I've done something that I think we all should do, which is my own sense of life review. So I've spent some time really looking back at my life and questioning, what have I done? What have been the highlights? What have been the lowlights? Have I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish? And I feel blessed enough to feel like most of the things I wanted to accomplish, I have.
Yeah, we often feel that the decisions that we make in our life maybe are small or don't matter, but the idea that everything that we decide to do continues to ripple into the universe. It's who will remember any of our names in hundreds of years from now, but the decisions that we decided to make on Earth and the people that we helped and the relationships that we build ultimately end up compounding well beyond our name. That's something that I often think about in my own life in terms of, creating and building a meaningful life. What are those ripples that I want to create?
So did I tell you about the other day I was at Barnes & Noble, right?
Yes,
and
right.
Every time I go to Barnes & Noble, I always go to the finance section, and this he must have been 22, 23.
Okay.
Guy walks over kind of cautiously, he's looking at the books.
Yeah.
2 minutes into it, he's been studying it.
He's been looking at
He's been looking, and I see his hand shoot out, and he grabs the last copy of Financial Freedom.
Yes.
And I'm like, dude, that's a great book.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, my friend told me if I can find it, I should get it, and it's 50% off, I'm totally buying it.
That's awesome.
And it was this great moment. I'm like, yeah, I know Grant actually, it is a great book. Totally check it out.
That's so cool. In your work, which has now moved into money, I know you've been working on a book. Can you talk about this intersection of money and dying? Do you ever have money conversations with patients who are dying? Does money even come up when people realize they only have, 2-6 weeks to live, or is it something that people don't even talk about at that stage often?
What I started realizing as someone who became interested in money because that gave me the way into financial independence, I was having all these end-of-life discussions with hospice patients, and they almost never talked about money unless they had to. When they talked about the regrets of life, it was never, I wish I worked harder. It was never, I wish I made more money. It was more, I wish I repaired these relationships, or I wish I did these things that I always wanted to do that I was too scared to try. The only time money came into it is if there wasn't enough money for their basic care. And then that became a real issue. So to me, that was the interesting part. It's we need enough money to support ourselves and our family and have the time and space to figure out our own identity and purpose. So it's a tool, but ultimately what I learned from the dying is it's not really the goal.
So how has your own relationship with money changed?
Money took up a lot of my thought process, especially at the beginning of this. I now spend a lot less time thinking about money. And part of the reason is I think you put your processes in place to manage the money so that you don't need to think about them. And so again, I think money much more of as fuel or potential energy, what will it give me the ability to do? And now I want to spend my time concentrating on those things I want to do.
Our relationship with money in this culture is often so toxic, and people make extreme trade-offs for their money. Just like myself, when I was pursuing financial independence, I really didn't take very good care of myself, and that's something now I've had to play catch up with in the subsequent years. Why do people make so many unreasonable trade-offs in the pursuit of money, especially when it comes to their physical health?
I think it still gets back to the fact that we start looking at money as a goal instead of a tool. And I think we do it because it's low-hanging fruit. It is really hard to say, my goal in life is to be an excellent pool player. And that's all I want to do with myself, and that's what I'm going to do. Or be an excellent writer, or be an excellent friend, or whatever it is that you find as your purpose. It's daunting to do that, but it's really easy to say, my goal in life is to make a lot of money. And there are steps I can do. I can either work a lot, I can do some side hustles, I can play the lottery and hope I win. There's steps you can take, and I think because it's low-hanging fruit, it lets us off the hook from doing some of the harder, deeper work.
So you've recently finished your book, Taking Stock, which is coming out later this year. Can you tell us a little bit about it and 2 or 3 of the key takeaways?
I think the main takeaways from the book are you need to first understand your purpose and identity, what you want to get out of the world. Then you need to have a very reasonable financial plan, how to get to financial independence, and there's a couple of ways to do that. And then last but not least, once you've kind of figured out what your purpose is, made a financial plan, you have to ask yourself one basic important question. Are you most afraid of running out of time or running out of money? I think we're about evenly spread between both. Those people who are worried about having enough time, people who are worrying that, God, I could die tomorrow and not have done so many things and fulfilled my dreams. My father's a perfect example of this. You know, my father told my mother when he married her that I feel like I'm gonna die young. He's like, it is what it is. And when I look at my dad and the way he managed finances, like he got life insurance and those kind of things because he had this feeling, but he didn't spend a lot of time worrying about money and saving and investing. I mean, he had interests, he was learning other languages, he was an avid photographer. For him, time was the biggest concern, so he wanted to live life to the fullest. I compare that to me. I've always felt like I was gonna live really long. It's just something I innately feel. So time is not my biggest concern, money is. So I felt a real urgency to grind it out at work and to make as much money as I could to get it into the stock market and let it compound so that I'd always have enough money, even if I retired at 48 and then didn't work a day in my life again until my 90s. So it really can help you decide the tempo of how you want to save for financial independence. I think everyone should strive towards financial independence. But if time is your biggest concern, maybe you save 10% and then you take 10 or 20% and put it in a YOLO fund, and you go and experience those things and follow your passions. And so if you're right, and God forbid you die young, you lived a full life. If you're wrong, you still have this good financial independence plan. It's just gonna take longer. So you're not gonna retire at 40. Maybe you retire at 60, but you're living life to the hilt up to that age.
How has your relationship to time changed over time? Do you feel like it moves faster as you get older? Do you feel like you have more time now that you're financially independent?
I think there's this idea of time arbitrage, right? When you're younger, you feel like you have all the time in the world. Also, when you're doing things you don't like doing, like time seems to be forever. Like try planking for 3 minutes. That'll be the longest 3 minutes of your life. On the other hand, as you get older, it seems like the days and the weeks and the months pass quickly. As I get older, I feel like time goes faster. On the other hand, being financially independent, I've had the benefit of slowing down. I feel like I have time abundance even though it's passing by faster, because I ultimately have control of what I fill that time with. And so it's all about perception, right? How are you perceiving the time you have left? Right now in my life, time feels vast and expansive, which it never did before when I was hustling just to get everything done in a day.
Even though time is moving equally fast for all of us, being able to change your relationship with it, just like changing your relationship with money, ultimately is a path to freedom. Well, Jordan, thank you for taking the time to come visit me in Ohio. I've really enjoyed spending this moment with you. Thank you for being so open and vulnerable. I'm really excited to continue to be on this life journey with you and for all of our future conversations.
Thanks for having me. It's a great conversation. It's always a blast to talk about these things. I think it's just the best way for us to look at our world and try to figure out how to do it better.